The orc woman standing on Jonas Vane's doorstep looked as though she would rather be anywhere else in the world, her olive-green fingers gripping a leather ledger so tightly the knuckles had gone pale. Jonas blinked at her through the late afternoon light, taking in the broad set of her shoulders beneath a worn wool coat, the small tusks that just cleared her lower lip, and the way her amber eyes refused to meet his own. He had been expecting someone, certainly. The debt had gone unpaid for months now, ever since he had buried Catherine in the spring, and found he could not quite summon the will to care about coin or collections, or any of the small practical matters that had once seemed so important. But he had expected the creditor's usual man, the one with the scarred knuckles and the breath that smelled of cheap gin. Not this. Jonas Vane. Her voice came out rough, like she had not used it much today. That is me. She opened the ledger, her thumb marking a page. You owe Mr. Harwell 63 silver marks, plus interest. That brings it to 71 marks as of this week. Jonas nodded slowly. I do. She seemed to be waiting for something, an argument perhaps, an excuse. When he simply stood there, she cleared her throat and tried again. Mr. Harwell says you have until month's end to pay, or he will take action. That seems fair. The orc woman's brow furrowed. She glanced down at her ledger as though it might contain instructions for this particular scenario, then back up at him. You understand what I am saying? He will take your shop, I understand. Jonas glanced past her at the sky. The clouds were gathering in the west, promising rain before nightfall. I was about to make tea. Do you take honey? She stared at him. What, in your tea honey? Some people prefer it without. He stepped back from the doorway, gesturing into the dim interior of the shop behind him. It will rain soon. You might as well come in. For a long moment she did not move. Then, with a bewildered shake of her head, she stepped over the threshold. The apothecary's shop smelled of dried herbs and beeswax, the shelves lined with jars and bottles that caught the fading light. Jonas moved to the small hearth in the corner, where a kettle already hung over glowing coals. He added wood to the fire with practiced efficiency, then reached for a pair of clay cups on the shelf above. I do not usually. The orc woman trailed off. Sit if you like. Jonas nodded toward the single chair near the counter. Though I am afraid I only have the one. I can fetch a stool from the back. I can stand. Suit yourself. He measured tea leaves into a small pot, his movements precise. The water began to steam. What is your name? She hesitated. Renna Cade. Renna. He repeated it as though testing the weight of it. That is a good name. It was my mother's. The kettle whistled. Jonas poured water over the tea leaves and set the pot aside to steep. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable exactly, but it held a strange quality, as though both of them were waiting for something to break. Why are you being kind to me? Renna asked finally. Jonas glanced at her. Why would I not be? Because I just threatened to take your shop. No. He poured tea into both cups, added honey to his own, and offered her the jar. Mr. Harwell threatened to take my shop. You simply delivered the message. Renna took the jar but did not use it. She watched him with those amber eyes, trying to puzzle him out. You are not afraid of me. Should I be? Most people are. Jonas picked up his cup and blew gently across the surface. Most people are fools. She almost smiled at that. Almost. Instead, she set the honey jar down and wrapped both hands around her cup, as though she needed its warmth. I have 6 more stops to make before dark. Then you should drink quickly. They stood in silence, sipping tea while the rain began to patter against the windows. Renna kept glancing toward the door, but she did not leave. Jonas wondered distantly if anyone had offered her tea before, or anything else for that matter. The frontier towns were hard places, and harder still for orcs. He had seen the way people looked at them in the market, the way mothers pulled their children closer when green skin came into view. "The tea is good," Renna said eventually. "Thank you. The mint is from my own garden. You grow herbs some, enough for my work." He gestured toward the shelves. "Chamomile, lavender, feverfew. The mint grows like a weed, so I have plenty to spare." Renna drained her cup and set it carefully on the counter. "I should go." "Of course." Jonas moved to open the door for her. The rain was steady now, drumming on the packed earth of the street. "Do you have far to walk?" "Far enough." He disappeared into the back room and returned a moment later with an oilcloth coat, old and patched but still serviceable. "Take this." "I cannot." "You can." He held it out. "I have another." Renna looked at the coat, then at him. Whatever she was thinking did not reach her face, but she took the coat, shrugged it on over her own, and pulled the hood up against the rain. "I will return it. Keep it." She shook her head. "I will return it. Next week." Jonas watched her walk away into the gray afternoon, her broad figure growing smaller until the rain swallowed her entirely. The week passed in its usual quiet way. Jonas opened the shop each morning, ground powders and mixed tinctures, sold what little his customers needed, and closed again at dusk. He ate simple meals alone at the table that had once held two place settings. He tended his small garden. He did not think over much about the debt, or Mr. Harwell, or the orc woman who had stood in his shop drinking mint tea as though it were the strangest thing that had ever happened to her. But when the following week brought her back to his doorstep, he found he had been expecting it. She carried the oilcloth coat folded over one arm and the ledger in her other hand. The day was fine and clear, the sky scrubbed blue by recent rain. Renna looked no more comfortable than she had the first time, but she met his eyes when she spoke. "I came to return this." "And to collect, I imagine." "That too." She held out the coat. Jonas took it. "Thank you. Would you like tea?" "I should not." "But would you like it?" A pause. Then, quietly, "Yes." This time she sat in the chair while he prepared the tea. Jonas worked in silence, aware of her watching him. When he handed her the cup, their fingers brushed for just an instant. Her skin was warm, the texture no different from his own save for the faint roughness of old calluses. "You did not pay," Renna said. "No. Harwell will not be pleased." "I imagine not." Jonas leaned against the counter, cradling his own cup. "But I do not have 71 marks, or 63 for that matter." "What happened?" He considered not answering, but there was something in her face, some genuine concern that made the words come easier. "My wife died in the spring." Fever took her quickly. The physician's fees were substantial, and after she was gone I found I did not much care about the shop or the debt or anything else. Renna's expression softened. "I am sorry, so am I." He drank his tea, "but that does not change the accounting." "No." She looked down at the ledger in her lap. "Harwell will send me back every week until you pay, and if you do not pay he will take the shop, I know." "Does that not worry you?" Jonas thought about it. "It should, but I find myself curiously unbothered by the idea of losing things." He met her eyes. "What about you? What about me? Does it bother you, being the one who comes to collect?" Renna set her cup down with great care. "Yes." "Then why do you do it?" "Because I need the work, and because Harwell pays better than anyone else who will hire an orc." Her voice had gone flat. "He knows people are afraid of me. That is why he hired me, to frighten debtors into paying." "I see. But you are not frightened." Jonas smiled faintly. "No, I am not." She stood, smoothing her coat. "I should go. Same time next week, unless you pay." "Then I will see you next week." He walked her to the door. "Renna," she turned, "thank you for the company." Something flickered across her face, too quick to name. Then she was gone, her footsteps fading down the street. The pattern repeated itself. Every week Renna arrived with the ledger. Every week Jonas offered tea, and every week they sat together in the quiet shop and talked. The conversations were small things at first, careful exchanges about weather and work and nothing of consequence. But gradually, like water wearing stone, they deepened. Renna told him about growing up in an orc settlement near the border, about her mother who had died when she was young and her father who had worked himself to death in the mines. She told him about coming south to the human towns, looking for something better, finding only suspicion and closed doors. She did not complain when she spoke. She simply stated facts, as though reciting entries from a ledger. Jonas told her about Catherine, about the years they had spent building the apothecary together, about the way she had laughed at his terrible jokes and sung while she worked. He told her about the emptiness that had settled into his bones after she died, the way colors seemed duller and food tasted like ash. He did not apologize for his grief. He simply shared it, the way one might share bread. On the fourth week, Jonas noticed the way Renna's hands had cracked from the cold and the rough work of her collection route. He vanished into the back room while the tea steeped and returned with a small clay jar. "What is this?" Renna asked. "Salve, for your hands." He set it on the counter. "Beeswax, lanolin, and calendula. It will help with the cracking." She picked up the jar, turned it over in her palms. "You made this morning." "Why?" "Because your hands hurt." He said it as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Renna opened the jar and sniffed the contents. The scent of honey and herbs filled the small space between them. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. "Thank you. You are welcome." She applied the salve carefully, working it into her roughened skin. Jonas watched her without speaking, noting the precise way she moved, the care she took even with this small kindness. When she finished, she capped the jar and slipped it into her coat pocket. "Jonas." Her voice was softer than usual. "Yes. Why are you kind to me?" He had no easy answer. Or perhaps he had too many and none of them were quite right. "Because you deserve kindness," he said finally, "and because I find I enjoy your company. Even though I come to threaten you each week, you come to drink tea each week. The threatening is just an excuse." She almost smiled. "Is it?" "I think so." The rain that had been threatening all afternoon finally broke, sudden and heavy. Renna glanced toward the door with a small sound of frustration. Jonas fetched the oilcloth coat from its hook and held it out. "I returned this," Renna said. "And now I am lending it to you again. You will not have it for the rain. I will manage." He pressed the coat into her hands. "Go, before it gets worse." She pulled the coat on, then paused at the door. "Jonas." "Yes, I am glad you are not afraid of me." "I am glad too." After she left, Jonas stood at the window and watched the rain turn the street to mud. He realized with something like surprise that he had been smiling. The fifth week brought complications. Renna arrived later than usual, and when Jonas opened the door he saw immediately that something was wrong. Her jaw was tight, her shoulders rigid with tension. She thrust the ledger at him without preamble. "Harwell wants me to start taking your inventory." Jonas took the ledger, scanned the new notation in heavy black ink. "I see. He says if you will not pay in coin, he will take payment in goods, starting today." She would not look at him. "I am supposed to assess what you have and report back to him. And then he will send men to empty the shop." "Yes." Jonas closed the ledger and handed it back to her. "Then you should come in and assess." "Jonas, I cannot." The words came out strangled. "I do not want to do this. I know." "Then why are you not angry with me?" "Because you are not the one I am angry with." He stepped aside. "Come in, Renna." She entered slowly, as though walking to her own execution. Jonas put the kettle on as always, measured tea as always, but the ritual felt hollow now. Renna stood in the center of the shop, turning slowly to look at the shelves she had seen a dozen times before. But this time she was cataloging them, counting the jars, estimating their worth. "This is a good shop," she said quietly. "You have quality stock." Catherine was particular about what we carried. "Harwell will sell it for half what it is worth." "I know." Renna pulled out a small notebook and began writing. Jonas watched her work, saw the way her hand shook slightly as she formed the letters. The tea finished steeping. He poured 2 cups and set one beside her elbow. "You do not have to do this," she said without looking up. "Do what?" "Be kind to me, not now." Jonas picked up his own cup. "Why would I stop now? Because I am taking your shop." "No." His voice was gentle but firm. "Harwell is taking my shop. You are simply the instrument he is using. That does not make me less guilty, nor does it make you the villain." He moved to stand beside her close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Renna, look at me," she did reluctantly. "I do not blame you," Jonas said. "Do you understand? Whatever happens, I do not blame you." Her eyes were wet. "You should. But I do not." They finished the inventory in silence. When Renna left, she did not take the tea he had poured for her. It sat on the counter, growing cold, while Jonas stared at the neat columns of her handwriting and wondered how much time he had left. 2 days later, Renna came back. It was evening, well past the usual hour for collections. Jonas was closing the shop when he heard the knock. He opened the door to find her standing in the dusk, still wearing her work clothes, her face drawn with exhaustion. "I need to talk to you," she said. "Come in." She paced the length of the shop twice before speaking, her movements agitated. Jonas lit a lamp and waited. "I have been thinking about the debt," Renna said finally. "About Harwell, about how he does business. All right. The interest he charges is too high. I have been going over the ledgers, not just yours but all of them, and the numbers do not make sense. He is charging more than the law allows." Jonas straightened. "Are you certain?" "Yes." She pulled a sheaf of papers from her coat, laid them on the counter. "Look. The frontier magistrate set the maximum rate at 5% per month for secured debts. Harwell has been charging 8, on some accounts 10. Jonas bent over the papers, scanning the columns of figures. His hands began to shake. "This is illegal, I know. If the magistrate knew, the debts would be voided or at least reduced to the legal amount." Renna's voice was tight. "But I cannot go to the magistrate." "Why not?" "Because Harwell will know it was me. I am the only one who has access to these ledgers. And if he knows, I betrayed him." She trailed off, but Jonas could fill in the rest. Harwell had a reputation. Men who crossed him had a way of disappearing or turning up with broken bones and empty purses. "Then I will go," Jonas said. "No." Renna put her hand over his, stopping him from gathering the papers. Her palm was warm, the calluses rough against his skin. "If you go alone, Harwell will say you stole the ledgers. It will be your word against his, and you are a debtor. The magistrate will not believe you." "Then what do we do?" She took a breath. "We go together. I testify that these are the true records, that I kept them myself on Harwell's orders. With my testimony, the magistrate will have no choice but to investigate." Jonas turned his hand over, threading his fingers through hers. "Renna, if you do this, you will lose your position, I know. And Harwell will come after you, I know that too." She met his eyes. "But I cannot keep doing this. I cannot keep taking from people who have nothing left to give, all so that Harwell can grow fat on illegal profits. And I cannot." Her voice cracked. "I cannot take your shop, Jonas, I just cannot." "Why?" The question came out barely above a whisper. Renna's face colored, a darker green spreading across her cheeks. "Because you are the only person in this town who has treated me like I matter. Because you offer me tea and give me salve for my hands and do not flinch when I walk through your door. Because when I am here, I do not feel like a monster." She squeezed his hand. "Because I think I am falling in love with you, and I do not know what to do about it. The shop was very quiet. Outside, somewhere distant, a dog barked. Jonas became aware that his heart was beating very fast. "You are falling in love with me," he repeated. "Yes." She said it like a confession. "I am sorry. Do not be sorry." He lifted his free hand to her face, cupped her jaw, felt the smooth strength of her. "Renna, I have been half in love with you since the second week you came here. I just did not think you could possibly feel the same. Why would I not? Because you are young and strong and fierce, and I am a widower who cannot even pay his debts." Renna laughed, a short, breathless sound. "And I am an orc who works for a criminal. We are a fine pair. We are." Jonas smiled. "A very fine pair." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. They stood that way for a long moment, breathing together in the lamplight. Then Renna pulled back, her expression turning serious. "We should go to the magistrate tomorrow," she said, "before I lose my nerve." "We will." Jonas gathered the papers, folded them carefully. "And after the magistrate voids the debts and Harwell loses his licenses, after you are out of work and I still have my shop, what happens then?" Renna's smile was small but real. "I suppose I will need to find new employment. I might know someone who needs help in an apothecary shop." Jonas kept his voice light. "The pay is not much, but the owner makes decent tea. Does he? So I am told. Then perhaps I will apply." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "Jonas." "Yes. Thank you for believing me, for not thinking I am foolish." "You are many things, Renna Cade, but foolish is not one of them." After she left, Jonas sat for a long time with the papers spread before him, tracing the lines of her careful handwriting. He thought about Catherine, about the life they had built and the love they had shared. He thought about grief and guilt and the strange paths that led one person to another. And he thought about Renna, about the way she had looked at him when she said she was falling in love, as though it were both the most terrifying and the most natural thing in the world. He slept poorly that night, turning the coming confrontation over in his mind. But when morning came, he rose and dressed and felt something like hope. The frontier magistrate kept offices in a squat stone building at the edge of town, its walls scarred by wind and weather. Jonas and Renna arrived just after dawn, the papers tucked safely inside Jonas's coat. The clerk who greeted them was a thin man with ink-stained fingers and a skeptical expression that deepened when he saw Renna. "Magistrate Hollis does not usually hear debt disputes," the clerk said. "This is not a dispute." Jonas laid the papers on the desk. "This is evidence of illegal usury." The clerk's eyebrows rose. He picked up the papers, scanned the first page, then the second. His expression shifted from skepticism to interest. "Wait here." They waited. The office was cold and smelled of dust and old parchment. Renna stood very straight, her hands clasped behind her back like a soldier. Jonas wanted to take her hand, to offer some reassurance, but he sensed she needed to face this on her own terms. Magistrate Hollis turned out to be a broad woman in her middle years, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She looked at the papers, then at Jonas and Renna, then back at the papers. "These are Silas Harwell's records?" she asked. "Yes, magistrate." Renna's voice was steady. "I kept them myself. Every entry is in my hand. And you are bringing them to me why exactly? Because the interest rates are illegal, and because I will not be party to theft, even if it wears the mask of legitimate business." Holly studied Renna for a long moment. "You know Harwell will not take this well." "Yes, magistrate. He may come after you, I know. And you are willing to testify to all of this under oath in a formal hearing?" "I am." The magistrate tapped her fingers on the desk, thinking. Then she looked at Jonas. "And you are Vane?" "The apothecary." "I am. You have a debt with Harwell." "I did. But according to these records, much of what I supposedly owe is illegal interest. Supposedly, Renna spoke up. The principal was 63 marks. At the legal rate, the interest after 4 months would be 12 marks and 60 pence. Harwell charged him 21 marks, nearly double. Hollis pulled an abacus across the desk and began working the beads, checking Renna's arithmetic. After a moment she grunted, "Your numbers are correct." "I know, magistrate. How many other debtors are in the same situation?" Renna hesitated. "At least 30, perhaps more." The magistrate's expression hardened. "I see." She stood, gathered the papers. "I will need to hold these as evidence. You will both need to give formal statements. And Miss Cade, you should be prepared to appear before a tribunal, I understand." "Good." Hollis moved toward the door, then paused. "For what it is worth, you are doing the right thing. Harwell has operated in the shadows for too long. It is time someone brought him into the light." The formal hearing took place a week later. In the intervening days, Jonas barely saw Renna. She was busy giving statements, meeting with the magistrate's investigators, preparing her testimony. Jonas kept the shop open and tried not to worry. But every evening he looked toward the door, hoping to see her broad-shouldered figure, and every evening he was disappointed. On the night before the hearing, she finally came. She looked exhausted, her face drawn and her eyes shadowed. Jonas pulled her inside, sat her down, and made tea without asking if she wanted any. She drank it in silence, both hands wrapped around the cup. "How are you?" Jonas asked. "Scared," she admitted. "Harwell knows, the whole town knows. People have been staring at me in the street." "Are they angry?" "Some are. The ones who benefit from Harwell's business, but others." She trailed off. "A woman came to me yesterday. She said her husband took a loan from Harwell 3 years ago and they have been paying it ever since. She wanted to know if I could help her too." "What did you tell her?" "That I would speak to the magistrate." Renna set her cup down. "Jonas, there are so many of them, so many people he has been bleeding dry year after year. Then you are doing the right thing." "I hope so." She looked at him. "Will you be there tomorrow at the hearing?" "Of course. I will need to see you, to know someone is on my side." Jonas reached across the space between them and took her hand. "I am on your side, always." She held on to him like he was the only steady thing in a tilting world. The hearing was held in the great room of the town hall, a cavernous space with high ceilings and rows of wooden benches. By the time Jonas arrived, it was already crowded. Debtors filled the seats, along with merchants and tradesmen and the merely curious. At the front, behind a long table, sat Magistrate Hollis and 2 other officials Jonas did not recognize. And off to one side, looking furious and dangerous, sat Silas Harwell. Harwell was a thick man with a red face and small eyes that tracked Renna as she entered the room. She wore a clean shirt and her best coat, and she walked to the witness stand with her head high. Jonas felt a surge of pride so fierce it was almost painful. The hearing proceeded with bureaucratic efficiency. The magistrate presented the evidence, called witnesses to authenticate the ledgers, and questioned Renna about the records she had kept. Renna answered every question clearly and without hesitation. Yes, she had written every entry. Yes, Harwell had instructed her to calculate interest at the higher rates. Yes, she understood the legal limits and knew the rates exceeded them. When it was Harwell's turn to speak, he stood and pointed a thick finger at Renna. "This is a betrayal. I gave that orc work when no one else would, and this is how she repays me." "The question is not her gratitude, Mr. Harwell," Hollis said coldly. "The question is whether you have violated the usury laws. I have done nothing wrong. These rates are standard in my business." "Standard, perhaps, but not legal." Hollis gestured to the stacks of ledgers on the table. "We have examined your records in detail, Mr. Harwell. You have charged illegal interest to at least 43 debtors over the past 5 years. The accumulated excess is more than 2,000 marks. A murmur ran through the crowd. Harwell's face went darker. You cannot prove that. I just did. Hollis leaned forward. And what is more, I am referring your case to the territorial court for prosecution. You will be fined, Mr. Harwell. Heavily. And you will repay every mark of illegal interest you have collected. Harwell's mouth opened and closed. For a moment, he looked like he might argue further. Then his gaze swept across the room, taking in the debtors who watched him with undisguised satisfaction, the magistrate who regarded him with cold justice, and Renna who stood tall and unbending in the witness stand. "This is not over," he said finally. "On the contrary," Hollis replied. "It is very much over. Bailiff, remove Mr. Harwell from this hearing." Harwell was escorted out, still sputtering threats. The room erupted in noise, everyone talking at once. Jonas pushed through the crowd toward Renna, who had stepped down from the witness stand and stood alone in the chaos. When she saw him, her expression crumpled with relief. "Is it really over?" she asked. "It is really over." Jonas took both her hands in his. "You did it, Renna. You ended him. We did it." "No," he squeezed her hands. "This was you, your courage, your choice." People began approaching then, debtors wanting to thank Renna, to tell her what the ruling meant for them. Jonas stepped back and let her have the moment. But he stayed close, watching as she spoke with each person in turn, accepting their gratitude with a kind of stunned humility. This was what she had needed, he realized. Not just the legal victory, but the recognition. The understanding that she was not a monster or a thug or a tool for someone else's cruelty. She was herself, and that self was worth something. Later, after the crowd had dispersed and the officials had filed out, Jonas and Renna walked back to the apothecary together. The afternoon sun slanted through the streets, turning everything golden. They did not speak much. There was a comfortable exhaustion between them, the kind that comes after a long battle won at the shop. Jonas unlocked the door and held it open. "Welcome to your new place of employment," Renna smiled. "I have not actually accepted the position yet. No. I think we should discuss terms first." "Very well." Jonas moved to the hearth, began preparing tea out of sheer habit. "What terms did you have in mind?" "Fair wages, regular hours, and the understanding that if you ever offer me tea, I will drink it. Those seem reasonable." He poured water over the tea leaves. "Anything else?" Renna came to stand beside him, close enough that he could feel her warmth. "Yes, one more thing." "What is that?" "I want to know if you meant what you said about being in love with me." Jonas turned to face her fully. Her amber eyes were very bright. He reached up and cupped her face, feeling the smooth strength of her, the small tusks that pressed against her lower lip, the pointed ears that flicked slightly at his touch. "I meant it," he said. "Every word. Good." She leaned down, closing the distance between them, and kissed him. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet. Jonas felt his heart stutter in his chest. He kissed her back, one hand sliding to the nape of her neck, the other resting on her shoulder. She made a small sound, almost a sigh, and pressed closer. They stood that way for a long moment, the tea forgotten, the world narrowed to just the two of them and the warmth they shared. When they finally broke apart, Renna was smiling. "I accept the position. I am very glad to hear it." They drank their tea sitting side by side on the floor, backs against the counter, shoulders touching. Jonas thought about all the paths that had led to this moment, the grief that had hollowed him out, the debt that had brought Renna to his door, the small kindnesses that had built a bridge between them. It had not been an easy road, but then nothing worth having ever was. "What will you do now that Harwell is finished?" Jonas asked. "Work here, learn the trade if you will teach me." Renna glanced at him. "I am good with my hands." I can grind powders, mix tinctures, whatever you need. I think you will be excellent at it. And beyond that, she hesitated. I do not know. I have spent so long simply surviving that I am not sure what to do with a future that is actually mine. Jonas took her hand. We will figure it out together. Together. She repeated the word as though testing it. I like the sound of that. They sat in comfortable silence as the afternoon faded into evening. Eventually, Jonas stood and lit the lamps, and Renna helped him close the shop for the night. It felt natural, the two of them moving around the small space, learning the rhythms of shared work. When they were done, Renna lingered at the door. I should go, she said. Find a room for the night. You could stay here. The words came out before Jonas could think better of them. I have a spare room upstairs. It is small, but the bed is good. Renna looked at him for a long moment. Are you certain? I am certain. Then I will stay. The room Jonas offered her had been Catherine's sewing room, a small space under the eaves with a narrow bed and a window that looked out over the garden. Renna stood in the doorway, taking it in. This is perfect, she said. I will bring up some blankets. The nights are getting cold. Jonas. She caught his arm as he turned to go. Thank you for everything. You do not need to thank me. I do, though. You saved me in a way, reminded me that I am more than what people fear when they look at me. Jonas smiled. You did the same for me. Reminded me that life continues, even after loss. They stood close in the narrow doorway, neither quite willing to step away. Then Renna leaned down and kissed him again, a lingering touch that promised more to come. Good night, Jonas. Good night, Renna. The weeks that followed settled into a new pattern. Renna proved to be a quick study in the apothecary trade, her strong hands surprisingly deft at the delicate work of measuring and mixing. She had a good memory for recipes and an instinct for what customers needed, even when they were not quite sure themselves. Jonas found himself relying on her more and more, not just for the work but for the companionship. The shop felt alive again, filled with her laughter and her questions and her steady, grounding presence. They courted quietly, in the way of people who had both known loss and understood the value of taking things slow. Jonas held her hand while they walked through the market. Renna kissed him good night at the top of the stairs. They learned each other in increments, discovering preferences and histories and all the small details that made a person themselves. The town's reaction was mixed. Some people muttered about the strangeness of a human and an orc together, but most were too grateful for Renna's role in bringing down Harwell to care much about her personal life. The debtors whose burdens had been lifted treated her with respect, and the merchants who had suffered under Harwell's influence welcomed her business. Slowly, grudgingly, the town began to accept her. 2 months after the hearing, on a clear autumn evening, Jonas closed the shop early and led Renna out to his small garden. The herbs had mostly finished for the season, but the mint still grew thick and green. He had set up a small table with 2 chairs and a pot of tea. What is this? Renna asked, smiling. Sit and see. She sat. Jonas poured tea for both of them, added honey to hers the way she liked it, and settled into the opposite chair. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. For a moment he simply looked at her, at the way the light caught in her dark hair, at the warmth in her amber eyes. I have something to ask you, Jonas said. Renna set her cup down. All right. When you first came to my door, I was a man with nothing left to lose. I had let grief hollow me out until I was barely living, but you changed that. You gave me a reason to care again, to want things, to hope. He reached across the table and took her hand. Renna Cade, I love you, and I would like very much if you would consent to be my wife. She stared at him. You want to marry me, more than anything. But I am an orc. People will talk. Let them talk. Jonas squeezed her hand. I do not care what people think. I care about you, about the life we could build together." Renna's eyes were bright with tears. "I love you too, so much. But are you certain? This will not be easy." "Nothing worth having ever is," he smiled. "So what do you say?" She laughed, a sound of pure joy, and came around the table to kiss him. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Jonas stood and pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. She smelled of mint and honey and the herbs they worked with every day. He felt her arms tighten around him, solid and real, and thought that this was all he needed. This woman, this moment, this future they would build together. "When?" Renna asked, pulling back just enough to look at him. "Whenever you want. Soon." She kissed him again. "I do not want to wait." They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the town hall, with Magistrate Hollies officiating and a handful of friends as witnesses. Renna wore a simple dress in deep blue, and Jonas wore his best coat. The vows were traditional, the words as old as marriage itself, but when they spoke them Jonas felt their weight. To have and to hold, for better or for worse, till death do us part. When Hollies pronounced them married, Jonas kissed his wife and felt something in his chest that had been frozen since Catherine's death finally thaw. It was not that he had forgotten her. He never would. But he had learned that love was not a finite resource, that the heart could hold both grief and joy, both memory and hope. The celebration afterward was modest but warm. Friends brought food and drink, and they gathered in the apothecary to toast the newlyweds. Renna laughed more than Jonas had ever seen her laugh, her face flushed with happiness. He stood back and watched her, marveling at how much his life had changed in such a short time. Late in the evening, after the guests had departed, Jonas and Renna climbed the stairs to the room that would now be theirs. Jonas had moved his things into Catherine's old space, creating a shared bedroom that belonged to them both. It felt strange and right in equal measure. Renna stood in the center of the room, looking around. "I never thought I would have this," she said quietly. "Have what? A home, a husband, a life that is mine." She turned to him. "I spent so long being what other people needed me to be, the strong one, the frightening one. The tool that Harwell used to get what he wanted, but with you I am just myself." Jonas went to her, took her hands. "You have always been yourself. I just saw what others did not." "What did you see?" "A woman who was kind despite every reason not to be. Who chose honesty even when it cost her everything. Who loved me when I was too broken to love myself." He lifted her hands to his lips, kissed her knuckles. "I saw you, Renna, and I loved what I saw." She kissed him then, deep and searching, and he responded in kind. They undressed each other slowly, learning the maps of each other's bodies with careful hands. Renna was strong and solid, all lean muscle and smooth green skin. Jonas traced the line of her jaw, the curve of her shoulder, the dip of her waist. She shivered under his touch, her breath catching. "I have never," she started, then stopped. "Never what? Been with anyone like this?" Her face colored. "I do not know what to do." Jonas smiled gently. "Neither do I, really. It has been a long time. We will figure it out together." They did. Slowly, with false starts and gentle laughter and a tenderness that made Jonas's throat tight. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Renna's head on his chest, his fingers trailing through her hair. "I love you," she murmured. "I love you too." They slept that way, wrapped in each other and the quiet certainty of home. The winter passed gently. Jonas and Renna fell into the rhythms of married life, working side by side in the shop during the day and curling together in front of the fire at night. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's thoughts and dreams. Renna proved to have a gift for the healing work, her hands steady and her instincts good. Customers began requesting her specifically, trusting her skill. In the spring, Renna told Jonas she was pregnant. He had been grinding feverfew when she spoke, and his hands went still on the mortar. "Pregnant?" "Yes." She watched him carefully as though gauging his reaction. "I am about 2 months along. Are you happy?" Jonas set down the pestle and went to her, pulled her close. "I am so happy I can hardly breathe," she laughed, relief evident in every line of her. "I was worried you would not want this, that it was too soon." "It is not too soon. It is perfect." He pulled back to look at her. "How do you feel?" "Tired. A little sick in the mornings, but mostly just amazed. I am going to be a mother. And I am going to be a father again." The words stuck in his throat. He had been a father once briefly, before the fever took the child with Catherine. But that was old grief and this was new joy, and he would not let one taint the other. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Renna's belly grew round, and Jonas found himself constantly distracted by the miracle of it. He would catch himself staring at her while she worked, marveling at the life they had created. Renna teased him gently about it, but he could tell she was pleased by his attention. In the early summer, Renna's pains began. Jonas sent for the midwife and spent the longest hours of his life pacing the shop while Renna labored upstairs. When the baby's cry finally split the air, he took the stairs 3 at a time. The midwife met him at the door. "A healthy boy," she said, smiling. Jonas entered to find Renna propped up in bed, exhausted and radiant, cradling a tiny bundle. The baby had green skin a shade lighter than his mother's, and when Jonas leaned close he saw amber eyes that blinked up at him with unfocused curiosity. "He is beautiful," Jonas whispered. "He is ours." Renna held the baby out to him. "Do you want to hold him?" Jonas took his son carefully, supporting the small head, feeling the weight of him. The baby made a small sound and Jonas felt his heart crack open all over again. "Hello, little one." "What should we name him?" Renna asked. Jonas thought for a moment. "What about Connor?" "It was my grandfather's name. Connor Vane." Renna tested it. "I like it. Connor it is then." The baby chose that moment to yawn, a huge open-mouthed yawn that showed tiny gums, and both parents laughed. Jonas sat carefully on the edge of the bed and Renna leaned against his shoulder. They stayed that way for a long time, the 3 of them, a family. Connor grew quickly, a sturdy child with his mother's strength and his father's quiet nature. He toddled around the shop, getting into everything, and both Jonas and Renna found their work constantly interrupted by the need to keep him out of the herb jars. It was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. When Connor was 2, Renna became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, and Jonas worried constantly. But Renna bore it with her usual stoic grace, working until the very last day before the birth. The second baby was a girl, small and fierce, with green skin and a lusty cry that announced her displeasure at being born into the cold world. They named her Mira, and she became the light of their household. The years passed in a blur of children and work and the 1,000 small moments that made a life. Jonas watched Renna blossom into motherhood, saw the way she was fierce and tender with their children in equal measure. He saw Connor learn to read, his small finger tracing the words in the herbals. He saw Mira take her first steps, laughing as she stumbled into her mother's arms, and through it all, he and Renna remained partners. They still drank tea together in the quiet moments, still talked late into the night, still found time to kiss in the garden when the children were asleep. The love between them did not diminish with time or familiarity. If anything, it deepened, becoming something richer and more complex. 10 years after the day Renna had first knocked on his door, Jonas stood in the shop and looked around with satisfaction. The shelves were fully stocked, the account books balanced, the reputation solid. Connor, now a gangly boy of 8, was carefully measuring dried mint into bags. Mira, 6 and indomitable, was pestering her mother with questions about why certain plants healed and others harmed. Renna caught his eye from across the room and smiled. In that smile, Jonas saw everything. The nervous woman who had stood on his doorstep with a ledger she hated, the brave soul who had chosen justice over safety, the wife who had made him whole again, the mother who loved their children with a fierceness that still took his breath away. "What are you thinking?" Renna asked, coming to stand beside him. "Just that I am a very lucky man." "You are." She kissed his cheek. "But so am I, a very lucky woman." Connor looked up from his work. "Papa, I am finished with the mint. What should I do next?" "Check the feverfew stores. We are running low." Mira tugged at Renna's apron. "Mama, can we go to the garden? I want to see if the new lavender is growing." "In a moment, love. Let me finish here first." Jonas watched his family work and talk and simply be, and thought about the strange paths that life took. He had lost Catherine, and that grief would always be a part of him. But he had found Renna, and she had brought him back to life in ways he could never have imagined. Sometimes, late at night, he would wake and find Renna watching him in the darkness. He would ask what she was thinking, and she would smile and say something like, "Just remembering the day you offered me tea," or "Just thinking about how different my life could have been." And he would pull her close and kiss her forehead and tell her he was glad, so glad, that she had walked through his door all those years ago. On a particularly fine autumn evening, when the children were in bed and the shop was closed, Jonas and Renna sat in their garden with cups of tea. The mint had grown thick and wild, just as it always did, and the evening air smelled of herbs and earth. Jonas reached across the small table and took his wife's hand. "I have something for you," he said. "Oh," Renna raised an eyebrow. "Is it my birthday?" "No. But I saw this in the market and thought of you." He pulled a small package from his pocket and handed it to her. Renna unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a simple silver ring engraved with a pattern of leaves. "Jonas, it is beautiful. It reminded me of you, strong and lovely and always growing." He took the ring and slid it onto her finger next to her wedding band. 10 years, Renna. 10 years since you first walked through my door. 10 years. She looked at the ring, then at him. "They have been the best years of my life." "Mine too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one. Connor's laughter drifted from an upstairs window where he was supposed to be sleeping. Mira's voice joined his, whispering something that made her brother giggle. "We should go tell them to settle down," Renna said without much conviction. "In a moment. In a moment." She squeezed his hand. They stayed that way as the night deepened, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life from tea and kindness and love. The shop behind them was full of healing things. The house above it was full of laughter, and the garden around them was full of mint that grew like wildflowers, abundant and unstoppable. It was, Jonas thought, exactly enough. Years continued to unfold with the same gentle steadiness. Connor grew into a thoughtful young man who inherited his father's patience and his mother's determination. He apprenticed in the shop, learning the craft with serious dedication. Mira, true to her fierce nature, decided she wanted to be a healer and traveled to study with physicians in the larger towns, returning with new knowledge that she shared eagerly. Jonas and Renna grew older together, their hair graying, their movements slower but no less certain. They still drank tea together every evening. They still worked side by side in the shop. They still held hands when they walked through the market. The town had changed too. More orc families had moved into the region, drawn by word that there was a place where they could live without constant fear. Renna became a quiet leader in that community, offering advice and support, helping new arrivals find work and homes. The apothecary became a gathering place, somewhere people knew they would be welcomed regardless of their skin color. On the 20th anniversary of the day they met, Jonas closed the shop early and led Renna to the garden. It was late summer, and the herbs were at their peak. He had set out their usual table and chairs, along with the teapot and cups they had used that very first day. "You kept these," Renna said, picking up one of the cups. "Of course I did. They are important." Jonas poured tea, added honey to both cups this time. "Do you remember that first day?" "I remember being terrified. I was supposed to frighten you, and instead you offered me tea." She laughed. "I thought you were the strangest man I had ever met. And now I know you are the strangest man I have ever met, and the best." She reached across and touched his face, her fingers gentle on his weathered skin. "Thank you, Jonas, for seeing me when no one else would. For loving me when I did not think I could be loved." "Thank you for coming back," Jonas replied. "Week after week, even when you did not have to. Thank you for being brave enough to trust me. We saved each other, I think. I think we did." They drank their tea as the sun set, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and rose. The garden smelled of mint and lavender and all the growing things they had tended together. From inside the shop came the sound of Connor helping a late customer, his voice patient and kind. Somewhere in the town beyond, Mira was likely debating some fine point of medicine with her colleagues, passionate and brilliant. "We built a good life," Renna said softly. "We did." Jonas set down his cup and took both of her hands in his, "And I would not change a single moment of it. Not even the hard parts, especially not the hard parts. They brought us here." Renna leaned forward and kissed him, a soft brush of lips that still made his heart race after all these years. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "I love you, Jonas Vane. I love you too, Renna Vane." They sat together as the stars came out, two people who had found their way to each other through debt and tea and small acts of persistent kindness. The world beyond the garden was still hard, still full of prejudice and pain. But here, in this small space they had created, there was peace. There was love. There was home. And that, Jonas thought as he watched his wife's face in the starlight, was more than enough. It was everything. The years that followed brought their share of challenges and joys in equal measure. Connor married a kind young woman from the next town over, a weaver named Sarah who laughed easily and loved their son with her whole heart. They gave Jonas and Renna 3 grandchildren in quick succession, filling the house with noise and chaos and delight. Mira eventually returned home with a wife of her own, another healer she had met during her studies. Together, they opened a small clinic next to the apothecary, expanding the family business. Mira's wife was human, and together she and Mira faced down the same prejudices that Jonas and Renna had weathered years before. But they faced them together, with the same stubborn determination, and gradually they too became part of the town's fabric. Jonas and Renna stepped back from the daily running of the shop, though neither of them could quite stop working entirely. Jonas still mixed his special tinctures, the ones that required decades of experience to get right. Renna still kept the books and managed the orders, her eye for detail as sharp as ever. But mostly they spent their time with their grandchildren, teaching them about herbs and healing and the importance of treating every person with dignity. On quiet evenings, they would sit in the garden that had become something of a sanctuary over the years. The mint still grew wild and thick, just as it always had, and Jonas had added other herbs over time until the small plot had become a proper physic garden. People sometimes came just to walk through it, to smell the lavender and rosemary and thyme, to find a moment of peace in their busy lives. It was in that garden, on a crisp autumn evening, that Jonas realized just how lucky he had been. Renna sat beside him, her hair more silver now than dark, her face lined with the marks of a life well lived. Their grandchildren were playing near the mint patch, the youngest trying to catch butterflies while his older siblings watched with fond exasperation. "What are you thinking?" Renna asked, the same question she had been asking for nearly 30 years. "I was thinking about the day you first came to my door," Jonas said. "How lost I was, how certain I was that nothing would ever matter again. And now I cannot imagine having missed this, any of it." He gestured to the garden, the children, the life they had built. "You saved me, Renna, in every way a person can be saved." She took his hand, her grip still strong despite the years. "You saved me too. You saw me as a person when everyone else saw a monster. You gave me a reason to be brave." "We gave each other a lot of things. We did." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I would do it all again, you know, every moment, even the frightening ones. So would I." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their family and feeling the weight of all the years between that first cup of tea and this moment. It had been a good life, Jonas thought. Not perfect, never perfect, but good in the ways that mattered, full of love and work and purpose. The sun dipped below the horizon, and Connor's oldest daughter came running up to them, breathless and excited. "Grandmama, Grandpapa, look what I found." She held out her hands, showing them a perfect sprig of mint. "That is lovely, darling," Renna said, taking the sprig and inhaling its fresh scent. "What are you going to do with it?" "I want to make tea, like you and Grandpapa always do." Jonas smiled. "Then we should go inside and I will show you how." The little girl took his hand, tugging him toward the house. Jonas looked back at Renna, who nodded and waved him on. He let himself be led inside, into the shop that had been the center of his life for so long, and began teaching his granddaughter the art of making tea. As he showed her how to measure the leaves and heat the water, he thought about continuity and legacy and all the ways that love perpetuated itself. He had loved Catherine, and that love had shaped him. He loved Renna, and that love had healed him. And now he loved these children and grandchildren, and that love would shape them in turn. It was not a grand life, not in the way that history books measured such things. There were no great battles won or kingdoms saved. But it was a life filled with small kindnesses and daily choices to see the good in others. It was a life built on tea and trust, and the radical notion that everyone, regardless of their skin or their species or their past, deserved to be treated with dignity. And that, Jonas thought as he handed his granddaughter her first perfect cup of mint tea, was perhaps the greatest legacy anyone could leave. The seasons continued to turn. Jonas and Renna grew older still, their steps slower, their joints stiffer, but their love undimmed. They celebrated 50 years of marriage with a gathering of family and friends, the shop overflowing with people who had come to honor them. Connor gave a speech about his parents that made everyone cry. Mira sang a song she had written about her mother's courage. And through it all, Jonas and Renna sat side by side, holding hands, marveling at how far they had come. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, they sat once more in their garden. The autumn air was cool, and Jonas had brought blankets to wrap around them both. They did not talk much. There was not much left to say that had not been said 1,000 times before, but the silence between them was full and rich, heavy with shared history. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I had not offered you tea that first day?" Jonas asked finally. Renna considered. "Sometimes. I think I would have delivered Harwell's threat and left. I would have kept working for him, kept frightening people, kept hating myself a little more each day. Eventually he would have been caught, or I would have broken, and either way my life would have been very different. I think I would have lost the shop, and without the shop, without a purpose, I am not sure what would have become of me. So we saved each other. We did." Jonas squeezed her hand. I am glad I offered you tea. I am glad I stayed to drink it." They sat together until the cold drove them inside, where they climbed the stairs to the bedroom they had shared for half a century. Jonas helped Renna into bed, tucking the blankets around her with the same care he had shown every night for decades. Then he climbed in beside her, and she curled against him with a contented sigh. "Good night, my love," Jonas whispered. "Good night, my heart," Renna replied. And in the morning, when they woke to find themselves still together, still alive, still blessed with another day, they rose and went downstairs and made tea together, just as they had done every morning for 50 years. It was a simple ritual, making tea. But it was their ritual, the foundation on which everything else had been built. And as Jonas poured water over the mint leaves and Renna got out the honey, they both understood that this, right here, was what happiness looked like, not perfect, not grand, but real and good and entirely their own. The shop continued to thrive under Connor and Mira's joint leadership, and Jonas and Renna spent their days helping where they could and watching their family grow. More grandchildren came, and then great-grandchildren, a whole new generation that would never know a world where orcs and humans could not love each other freely. On the 60th anniversary of the day they met, Jonas woke to find Renna already awake, watching him in the early morning light. "You are staring," he said, smiling. "I am allowed. You are my husband for 60 years, 60 years." She touched his face, tracing the deep lines time had carved there. "Do you know what I am grateful for?" "What?" "That I was brave enough to knock on your door that first day. That I did not run away when you offered me tea. That I chose to trust you, even when every instinct told me not to trust anyone. I am grateful you did too. And I am grateful that you were grieving but not bitter, that you chose kindness when you could have chosen cruelty. That you saw me as a person and not as a monster." Jonas took her hand, brought it to his lips. "You were never a monster, Renna. You were always just yourself, and yourself was always enough." She kissed him then, a long, slow kiss that tasted of all the years they had shared. When they finally broke apart, she was smiling. "We should get up. Connor will be opening the shop soon, and I promised to help with the inventory. Always working. Always." She climbed out of bed, moving carefully. Her joints ached more these days, but she never complained. "Are you coming?" "In a moment. I want to watch you a bit longer," she laughed. "Sentimental old man. Your sentimental old man. Mine." She said it with such satisfaction that Jonas felt his heart swell. "Always mine." They went downstairs together, moving slowly but steadily, and began their day the way they always did. With tea, with mint from the garden, with honey stirred in with a careful hand, and with each other steady and constant and true. It was enough. It had always been enough. And it would be enough for whatever days remained to them. Years passed, as years do, and Jonas and Renna grew frailer. But even in their advanced age, they remained partners, supporting each other through the small indignities and larger challenges that came with growing old. When Jonas's hands shook too much to measure herbs precisely, Renna did it for him. When Renna's eyes grew too dim to read the account books, Jonas read them aloud. They were blessed with long lives, both of them, and they were together until the very end. Jonas passed away first, peacefully in his sleep, with Renna's hand in his. The funeral was well attended, the shop crowded with people whose lives he had touched over the decades. But no one grieved him more than Renna, who had lost her partner and her love and her best friend all at once. She lived for 2 years after that, staying in the shop and working as much as her body would allow. She told stories about Jonas to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive with fierce determination. And every evening, without fail, she made tea. She would pour 2 cups, one for herself and one for the empty chair across from her, and she would talk to Jonas as though he were still there. "I miss you," she would say. "The shop is not the same without you. Nothing is the same without you." But she also told him about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about Connor's successes and Mira's innovations, about all the ways their family continued to grow and thrive. She told him that she was proud of what they had built together, that she had no regrets, that she would find him again when her time came. And when that time finally did come, when Renna closed her eyes for the last time surrounded by her loving family, she went with a smile on her face. Because she knew with absolute certainty that wherever Jonas was, he was waiting for her, and he would have tea ready. They buried her next to Jonas in the small cemetery on the edge of town, beneath a simple stone that read, "Renna Vane, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she chose courage." The shop continued, passed down through generations, each one adding their own touches while maintaining the core values that Jonas and Renna had established. The sign above the door was repainted many times over the years, but it always read the same: "Vane's Apothecary, all welcome." And in the garden behind the shop, the mint continued to grow wild and thick, a living memorial to a love that had started with a simple offer of tea and had grown into something beautiful and enduring. Couples would sit there sometimes, drinking tea and talking, not knowing the history of the place but feeling its peace nonetheless, because that was the legacy Jonas and Renna had left behind. Not just a shop or a family, but a reminder that kindness mattered, that seeing the person behind the prejudice mattered, that small gestures, offered with genuine care, could change lives and build futures and create love that lasted beyond death itself. It was a good legacy, the best kind of legacy. And somewhere in whatever comes after, Jonas and Renna sat together in a garden that smelled of mint and honey, drinking tea and holding hands and knowing that they had done well. They had loved each other. They had built a good life. They had raised good children who had raised good children in turn. They had, against all odds and expectations, found happiness. And that was everything.